The script didn't become a mystery, it was turned into one. In 1864, a missionary reached Rapa Nui and said carved tablets covered in strange signs were sitting in all the houses. Think about that. The evidence was still there, the tradition was still close enough to touch. Then, slave raids, disease, and missionization tore through the island, and the people who could have explained this world were broken or gone. So this is not just an unsolved code, it is the wreckage of a knowledge system. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Lore, from Latin America's history to mysteries and true crime to local legends, whispering Latin intrigue. Hit subscribe, fresh revelations drop every week, ready for your next campfire debate. Imagine a piece of wood darkened by salt, smoke, and hands long gone. Across its face march birds, faces, paddles, crescents, little bodies bent in procession. You follow one line to the edge, and then the world has to turn in your hands before the next line makes sense. That is the first trap of Rongorongo. It looks like a riddle carved into wood, but the deeper riddle is not what these signs say. It is why their voice was broken, because this script did not simply fall silent, it was pushed into silence. In the year 1864, a missionary named Eugène Eyraud arrived on Rapa Nui, a volcanic island in the southeastern Pacific that outsiders named Easter Island, and he later wrote that these inscribed tablets were in all the houses. That one detail should stop you cold. Not because it proves everything, it does not, but because it tells us that by the mid-19th century, this tradition was not a rumor, not a fantasy, not some modern invention sold to tourists. It was there, in people's homes, alive enough to be seen, ordinary enough to be present, precious enough to be remembered. And that is where the story usually gets told badly. People love to call Rongorongo the script that went silent, as if mystery itself swallowed it whole. No, the silence has a history, and that history has ships, disease, priests, merchants, and grief. In the early 1860s, Peruvian slave raiders tore through Rapa Nui and carried people away. Disease followed. Missionization deepened the break. The old lines of teaching frayed and then snapped. The script did not vanish in a puff of legend. A wounded society lost the people who knew how to keep it speaking. Most people come to Rapa Nui looking for stone. The moai take the horizon. Their faces hold the wind. The postcards, the documentaries, the easy myths. But wood is where another kind of memory survived. Small, carved, portable, fragile memory. Not a giant head on a platform, but a board you can hold in your hands. That difference matters. Stone dominates the landscape. Wood asks for intimacy. Once you understand from far away, the other demands you lean close enough to see the cut of a blade, the place where a sign nearly vanished over time, and handling. The word Rongorongo itself leans toward sound. In Polynesian languages around it, the roots point toward hearing, reciting, chanting, and declaring. So these were not texts in the modern sense, not things someone read alone in silence with their eyes doing all the work. They were more likely to perform, spoken through and carried by memory and voice. The board was not merely a storage device, it was part of an event. That changes how you imagine the room. Less library, more ceremony. Less private reading, more recitation. Less page, more pulse. What survives today is painfully small. Depending on how you count fragments, doubtful cases, and damaged pieces, we are dealing with a little over 24 inscribed objects and only a smaller circle of long, rich texts. Altogether, the readable signs add up to roughly 15,000. That sounds like a lot until you remember what decipherment usually needs. Archives, dozens of texts, secure excavations, bilingual clues, and long traditions of copying. Rongorongo gives us none of that in abundance. It gives us splinters, beautiful splinters, disciplined splinters, but splinters all the same. A few names keep appearing as survivors are called in a roll. Tahua, Aruku Kurenga, Mamari, the Santiago staff. Some are tablets, some staff, some stranger things. A few preserve long runs of signs, others keep only short damaged sequences. Several are known partly through old photographs, rubbings, or line drawings, because the objects themselves are worn, scattered, or difficult to study. Sometimes in Rongorongo studies, you are not reading the wood itself, you are reading someone's old attempt to rescue the wood before more of it disappears. The carvings sit on wood that is often reused, drifted, repurposed, or foreign. Some pieces come from driftwood, some from planks, some from boards shaped by contact with Europeans. That detail has fueled arguments for generations. A script carved on European wood is still indigenous if Rapa Nui hands carved it, but it complicates dating. And here we need to keep one sober thought in view. The age of the wood is not the age of the carving. A board can be older than the signs cut into it. Timber and inscription are not always born on the same day. Now hold one of these objects in your imagination. You trace a line from left to right. When you reach the edge, you do not simply drop your eyes down to the next line. You turn the board, then you read the next line, then you turn it again. Line after line, the object keeps asking your hands to rotate the world. Scholars call this reverse boustrophodon, but the human truth is simpler. Reading Rongorongo was a movement. Orientation mattered. The body had to join the act. The inscription did not only live in the eye, it lived in the hands. The signs themselves are vivid enough to lure you into a mistake. You see birds, heads, fish, paddles, plants, crescents, human figures. You think, fine, bird means bird, but scripts do not owe us that kind of honesty. A bird can be a sound, a title, a ritual idea, a piece of grammar, a memory aid, or something we have not guessed correctly once in all these years. What matters most is not that the signs look alive, it is that they behave like a system. They repeat, they cluster, they return in patterned sequences instead of wandering around like decoration. That is one of the few solid stones under our feet. Rongorongo is real. It is not a hoax, not random doodling, not a modern fantasy stitched together after the fact. The surviving inscriptions show order, convention, and internal discipline. Some passages echo across different objects, as if multiple pieces preserve versions of related compositions. Some signs recur far more often than others, some fall into fixed positions. The wood keeps receipts. Whatever this system was, it was meant to hold something stable. The argument begins after that point, not before it. Because structure alone is not enough to solve the hardest question. Does Rongorongo record spoken language in the full way a deciphered writing system does? Or does it sit somewhere between writing and ceremonial notation, a mnemonic code tied to expert performance? That remains open, and there is no shame in saying so. Good history is not embarrassed by the edge of what it cannot prove. The safest ground is this. Rongorongo was a highly conventional Rapa Nui inscription system tied to specialized knowledge, and nobody has yet produced a reading that can walk across the whole corpus without stumbling. Why is it still unread? Because this is close to a worst-case scenario for decipherment. The corpus is small, the objects were collected late, many are damaged, no Pacific Rosetta Stone is waiting in a museum drawer, no bilingual text with one language we already know and another we can test against it. There is no long, secure chain of native readings that can be checked line by line. Even the sign inventory is debated. So when people ask why nobody has cracked it yet, the answer is simple. The puzzle did not come down to us whole. It came down after the fire. And Eyraud's timing is part of that tragedy. He sees the tablets in 1864. By the time the subject begins to catch real outside attention, the island is already reeling. Within just a few years, reports suggest many inscriptions had been hidden, removed, or destroyed. So the world does not meet Rongorongo at the beginning of its story. It arrives after the break. We are not standing in the school while the lesson is being taught. We are in the ashes, asking what the lesson used to be. Then there is the wound beneath the puzzle. In the slave raids of 1862 and 1863, more than 1,000 Rapa Nui were taken away into forced labor. Disease traveled with the violence. Missionaries, colonial rule, and later removals kept grinding down the island's social body. By 1877, the population had crashed to 111 people. Think about what that means for a specialist tradition. Not just lives lost, also teachers lost, apprentices lost, correction lost, context lost, memory fragmented, unable to train the next generation to continue the tradition. This is why the old phrase, the script that went silent, never feels honest enough. Scripts do not become mute by magic. Institutions collapse. Sacred things are hidden because danger has entered the village. Knowledge thins, then phrase, then becomes an image without method, and a gesture without inheritance. A few people may still know part of it. A few more may recognize the look of it. But recognition is not transmission. The line breaks. And once it breaks under that kind of violence, even memory can start sounding like rumor. Still, the original question refuses to sit quietly. Earlier visitors did not leave an uncontested, detailed description of the script. That silence has haunted the debate ever since. Some scholars hear it and say the simplest answer is that Rongorongo must have developed after contact, perhaps after islanders saw outsiders using writing and grasped the power of marks arranged in order. Others answer that outsiders miss restricted practices all the time, especially things bound to ceremony, status, or sacred knowledge. A stranger failing to notice a tradition is not the same as that tradition not existing. There is also the famous Spanish annexation ceremony of 1770, when Rapa Nui leaders made marks on the treaty document. Those marks are not a readable Rongorongo text. They do not solve the mystery, but they do show that the theater of writing, the authority of signed paper, had already stepped onto the island's stage. So a contact-era invention is entirely plausible, not a copy of the Latin alphabet, not a borrowed script family, but an indigenous response to the idea that power could be fixed in signs. Human beings are fully capable of that leap. And there is one newer wrinkle the wood itself has thrown back at us. In 2024, radiocarbon dating pushed one tablet's timber back to the 15th century. There is no proof that every carved line is pre-contact, but enough to keep that older door open. The caution still matters. Dating the wood does not automatically date the carving. A piece of timber can wait a long time before anyone incises it. Even so, that result changed the atmosphere of the debate. The wood had spoken, and it had spoken earlier than some expected. So where does that leave us? In the most honest place, with both doors still open. A pre-contact origin is possible. An early contact invention shaped by awareness of writing is also possible. A crude late hoax does not fit the evidence. By the time outsiders really noticed Rongorongo, the system already looked too structured, too disciplined, too culturally embedded for such dismissal. But the evidence is still too thin for a courtroom-style verdict. We have enough to reject nonsense. We do not have enough to declare the case closed. The safest image is not of mass literacy spread across the island. These were not shopping lists, tax notes, or everyday letters. Everything about the surviving tradition points toward prestigious knowledge, recitation, ceremony, memory, and teaching within a restricted circle. Think of a school that is half archive and half performance. Think of a chant so formal that the board helps hold its bones. Think of names, lunar nights, ritual sequences, inherited formulas, genealogies, mythic recitations, not because we can read those contents cleanly everywhere, but because the surviving context leans hard in that direction. One section does stand on firmer ground than the rest. On the tablet known as Mamari, a stretch of text lines up convincingly with a lunar calendar. Not a total translation, not a scene where the whole script suddenly opens like a gate, but enough that many careful readers agree this passage most likely tracks the nights of the moon in a sequence known from Rapa Nui and wider Polynesian tradition. In a field littered with dazzling overclaims, that matters enormously. The Mamari passage is the nearest thing Rongorongo has to a shared foothold, the one place where the ground feels less like mist. And that lunar clue matters for more than scholarly pride. In Polynesian worlds, the moon was not a decoration. It ordered fishing, planting, ritual timing, movement, and the feel of the month itself. Nights had names, time had character. So if Mamari really preserves a moon night sequence, then the wood is not just pretty. It is carrying disciplined cultural information, something structured enough to be repeated, recognized, and checked against living tradition. That does not mean we suddenly know how every other sign works. It means we know the tablets were capable of holding more than an image. They were holding sequence, memory, and social rhythm. Beyond Mamari, the contents remain mostly shadows with good reasons behind them. Genealogies have been proposed, ritual chants, lists of titles or names, mythic recitations, calendrical lore, training texts copied by students. None of these ideas fell from the sky. They come from the internal patterning of the inscriptions, from the logic of Polynesian ceremonial life, and from scattered historical testimony. But proposed is the key word. The story here is not about pretending every shadow is a face. It is about learning which shadows have weight, which ones repeat, and which ones dissolve the moment you bring a stronger lamp. Wait, notice this. The real drama is not that no one ever tried to read Rongo. The real drama is that people have been trying for more than a century, and the wood keeps refusing to hand over easy victories. First came fragments of remembered recitation, especially the famous sessions around Bishop Josen and Metoro Tawa Uri. Those accounts matter historically, but they do not hold steady enough to function as a key. A sign gets named, then slides into an image, association, or ceremony. You can feel the memory there. You cannot build a secure alphabet out of it. Then came the people who tried to map the storm instead of pretending it had already passed. Thomas Barthel never truly deciphered Rongorongo, but he did something just as important. He gathered the corpus, organized the objects, numbered the signs, clarified reading order, and showed where passages seemed to parallel each other across different texts. In other words, he gave the field a shared battlefield. Sometimes the person who draws the map does more for the future than the person who claims to have found the treasure. Without Barthel, later arguments would have floated in fog thicker than the one we already have. After that came the bold modern breakthrough that, in the end, was not a breakthrough. Stephen Roger Fisher argued that he had essentially cracked the system, especially through the Santiago staff, reading it as a kind of creation chant, driven by a repeated formula. It was vivid. It was ambitious. It was the kind of claim that makes headlines and makes viewers lean closer. And then the criticisms came down hard. Circular reasoning, unstable sign values, too much weight placed on a single repetitive pattern, and too little ability to make the rest of the corpus obey the same method. Every time someone says the code is cracked, the wood refuses the next line. That refusal has shaped the best modern work. The stronger studies today tend to be both humbler and tougher. Instead of declaring victory, they sharpen the drawings, compare parallel passages, sort variants from true signs, model worn surfaces in 3 dimensions, and ask what kind of system this might be before demanding a full translation from it. That work is less glamorous. It does not sell itself as a miracle, but it is the work that lasts. It narrows the problem, honestly. It teaches us where the repetitions are real, where the damage has fooled older readers, and where the wood has more to say than we first thought. So was Rongorongo real writing? That depends on what you ask writing to do. If you mean a system that can represent open-ended spoken language the way Maya glyphs or cuneiform can, then the proof is still not in our hands. But if you mean a standardized inscription tradition that encoded culturally stable information through ordered signs, then yes, almost certainly. The signs are too disciplined, the repetitions too patterned, the parallels too strong, the Mamari passage too persuasive for dismissal. The safer answer is that Rongorongo lives somewhere on the threshold where writing, notation, performance, and memory meet, and that threshold is exactly where bad theories rush in, because space attracts fantasy. So here come the usual trespassers: Atlantis, lost continents, vanished super civilizations, Egyptians, Israelites, visitors from the stars. No, Rongorongo is not a secret branch of some world-spanning script family hidden in plain sight. Those stories fail because they do not read the texts in any controlled way, and because they steal intelligence from the people who made them. The moment you blame every impressive thing on outsiders, lost empires, or aliens, you erase Rapa Nui hands, Rapa Nui invention, and Rapa Nui memory. The deeper loss is not only the meaning of individual signs, it is the whole social body that once animated them. Imagine trying to recover a song from a few surviving bars after the singers are gone, the language has shifted, the hall is empty, and the last conductor died before anyone thought to write down the gestures. That is closer to the problem than any lock and key metaphor. We may be missing tone, pacing, ritual setting, voice, correction, the difference between what a sign looked like and how it was actually recited. A board can preserve cuts. It cannot preserve the whole room. That is why the material itself feels almost cruel in its symbolism. The island's most famous memory stands in stone. Rongorongo survives in wood. Stone dominates the skyline and survives the century with a wounded kind of dignity. Wood can be burned, traded, split, rubbed smooth, carried into exile, copied badly, or handled to death. A library made of wood is still a library, but it is a vulnerable one. That may be why these objects hit so hard. They feel close to the hand and close to disappearance at the same time. They carry endurance and fragility together, and yet they endure. In museums, in line drawings, in corrected transcriptions, in arguments that still have not died. A little over 24 survivors, scattered far from the island that made them, were still forcing the world to admit that Rapa Nui held more than stone carving and tourist legend. It held a disciplined graphic tradition sophisticated enough to resist quick explanation. It is much easier to consume a mystery when it is detached from its people, harder when the mystery keeps pointing back to historical violence, to broken transmission, to the fact that what we cannot read may be unreadable because someone made people bleed. So when you hear the phrase, "the script that went silent," turn the board one more time in your mind. Turn it the way a reader once would have had to turn it, line by line. On one side, you will see the mystery everyone clicks for: birds, faces, signs, the unsolved code in the middle of the Pacific. On the other side, you will see the harder truth: slave ships, disease, missionaries, scattered artifacts, a knowledge class broken before the rest of the world learned how to listen. Both sides belong to the story. Ignore either one, and the tablet is upside down in your hands. One day, a stronger key will appear. A better reading of parallel passages, a cleaner digital model, a pattern in Mamari, or some still overlooked link with oral tradition will push the door wider, but even if that day comes, the first lesson should not change. Rongorongo is not powerful because it feeds our hunger for the unsolved. It is powerful because it survived long enough to prove that Rapa Nui memory once had another form, carved, ordered, performed, and then wounded. The wood does not ask us for fantasy. It asks us for patience, humility, and the courage to name what broke the chain. So here is the question I want to leave in your hands. Was Rongorongo a full writing system, a ceremonial memory device, or something living in the charged space between the two? And maybe the second question matters even more. How much human knowledge becomes unreadable, not because it was primitive, but because violence passed through the people who carried it? Keep one promise with the island when you do. No aliens, no Atlantis, no stolen genius. Let the wood stay in Rapa Nui's hands, even while its voice is still fighting its way back to us. Muchas gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's most intriguing stories are far from over.